Something is shifting inside the world's largest retailer, and it isn't the kind of change that gets announced on an earnings call or makes the front page of the financial press. It is happening in the quiet, micro-frustrations of a standard Tuesday morning shop. A wait at a counter that used to be empty. A receipt total that doesn't quite square with the mental math you did while walking the aisles. A household brand that your family has relied on for 2 decades that suddenly, without explanation, is no longer there. Most people who walk through those automatic sliding doors can feel that the ecosystem has changed. They just don't have the words to describe it yet. Consider the paradox playing out right now in thousands of suburbs across the country. A grandmother drives to her local supercenter with a single item on her mind: infant formula for her newborn grandchild. She knows the layout by heart. She walks down the familiar aisle, reaches out, and hits a wall of plexiglass. The formula is padlocked. Next to the case is a small plastic button with a prompt. Press for assistance. She presses it. A mechanical chime echoes 3 aisles over. 2 minutes pass. She presses it again. By the time an overworked employee arrives with a master key, 7 minutes have ticked by. For 7 minutes, a human being stood in a multi-billion-dollar temple of modern logistics, staring at a basic necessity 2 feet from her face, entirely powerless to touch it. This isn't an isolated incident. It is the new structural reality of American retail. Razors, cold medicine, cosmetics, laundry detergent, everyday items that consumers have freely grabbed off shelves for half a century are migrating behind lock and key. The corporate justification is simple: retail theft. Shrinkage has reached a scale that threatens margins, and locking up merchandise is a direct, blunt force solution that works on paper. But paper metrics ignore the human cost. This strategy transfers the entire burden of security onto the honest consumer. The person who woke up at 5 a.m. for a shift, the parent running on 3 hours of sleep. They've done nothing wrong. Yet the system treats them as a liability until proven otherwise. The real sting comes from the baseline contradiction of the space you are standing in. You are surrounded by some of the most advanced capital-intensive technology on the planet. There are more cameras overhead than in a casino, algorithms tracking foot traffic patterns, and digital networks monitoring inventory in real time. Yet, despite this panopticon of efficiency, you cannot buy a $5 tube of toothpaste without waiting for a physical key to turn in a mechanical lock. The store has been quietly, fundamentally redesigned. It is no longer optimized for the fluid experience of buying things. It is optimized for the clinical management of risk. And the shopper has been reassigned from an honored guest to a variable that must be contained. But the physical barriers are only the most visible symptom of a deeper transformation. While your eyes are fixed on the locked cases, the shelves themselves are undergoing a silent takeover. The national brands that defined the American supermarket for generations are being systematically starved of oxygen. A historic product loses 2 shelf slots this month. Next quarter, it gets pushed to the bottom row, until finally, you realize the space has been entirely conquered by great value or better goods. Walmart didn't just expand its private labels, it weaponized them. The packaging has been scrubbed of its old budget look and replaced with clean, minimalist aesthetics that mimic high-end organic brands. But as the appearance has moved upscale, the old price gap has narrowed. In category after category, the corporate brand now costs nearly as much as the name brand it displaced. This is the ultimate retail trap. You walk into a building the size of an aircraft hangar under the assumption that its sheer scale guarantees choice. The architecture implies an open marketplace, but the closer you look, the more you realize that the variety is an illusion. A massive, growing percentage of what fills those aisles traces back to a single vertical pipeline controlled entirely by the house. Walmart used to be the arena where the world's manufacturers competed for your dollar. It is an entity that sets the rules of the game, owns the stadium, and plays as a competitor, all at the same time. Why is a company generating over $600 billion a year making its stores harder to navigate and its choices narrower? The answer isn't failure, it's far more unsettling. Walmart is changing because the American economic landscape has fractured, and the titan of low prices is quietly abandoning the demographic that built its empire. They are preparing for a different future. To understand where your money is actually going, You have to look past the blue logo and into the cold mechanics of a corporate pivot that is changing the rules of modern survival. To understand how the world's largest retailer reached this operational inflection point, one must look past the modern glass facades and examine the rigid geographical and economic blueprint laid down in the mid-20th century. Walmart did not conquer the retail landscape by competing directly with the established department stores of urban America. Its rise was dictated by a specific geographic trap: the systematic isolation of rural and suburban towns. When Sam Walton opened the first official Walmart store in Rogers, Arkansas, in 1962, the strategy relied on absolute regional dominance in areas that national competitors ignored. The business model was built on a simple premise: find a town with a population under 10,000, establish a massive footprint, undercut the local independent merchants, and become the sole provider of everyday goods for a 30-mile radius. This rural monopoly created a predictable consumer base, but it also created an infrastructure vulnerability that requires immense capital to manage. The logistical framework developed by executive David Glass in the 1970s and 1980s invented the cross-docking distribution system, where goods were moved continuously from supplier trucks directly to store delivery vehicles without ever sitting in a warehouse. By 1980, the company operated 276 stores, relying entirely on this highly optimized hub-and-spoke model. The entire corporate machine was calibrated for high-volume, low-margin turnover. It was a structure built for a stable economy where diesel fuel was cheap, supply chains were linear, and domestic manufacturing kept wholesale costs predictable. The first major systemic shock occurred in the late 1990s and early 2000s, as the company maxed out its rural expansion and was forced to enter highly competitive suburban and metropolitan markets. This shift required a fundamental alteration of the company's real estate strategy, migrating from basic discount stores to the 180,000 square foot supercenter format, which combined general merchandise with full-scale grocery operations. This expansion coincided with a massive pivot toward global sourcing, specifically following China's entry into the World Trade Organization in December 2001. The company became the primary pipeline for low-cost foreign manufactured goods entering the United States, utilizing its unprecedented scale to dictate pricing terms to global suppliers. If a manufacturer refused to lower their wholesale margins, they were simply stripped of their shelf placement. However, this reliance on an extended international supply chain created a geographic trap that began to snap shut over the last decade. The operational model assumed that international shipping lanes, port operations, and domestic trucking networks would remain permanently stable and inexpensive. When global shipping container rates spiked dramatically between 2020 and 2022, and domestic driver shortages increased transport overhead, the structural cost of moving low-margin goods across continents escalated permanently. At the same time, municipal zoning laws in urban areas and rising real estate costs across major metropolitan corridors made the construction and maintenance of massive physical supercenters financially inefficient. The corporate reaction to these escalating overhead costs was not a reduction in profit expectations, but a systematic overhaul of store labor economics. For decades, the company's primary mechanism for cost control was its workforce management. Landmark legal challenges, such as the Walmart Stores Inc. v. Duke Supreme Court case in 2011, highlighted the intense internal pressures surrounding wage expenditure and corporate labor practices. As statutory minimum wages began rising across multiple states throughout the 2010s and 2020s, the traditional model of staffing massive retail floors with low-wage hourly workers became a balance sheet liability to offset rising payroll expenses. Corporate leadership initiated a multi-phase automation directive. The introduction of self-checkout infrastructure, accelerated significantly after 2019, was not merely a technological upgrade. It was a deliberate labor displacement strategy designed to shift the physical work of scanning and bagging onto the consumer while reducing front-end payroll hours. According to industry labor reports, this structural shift allowed individual stores to run entire checkout zones with a fraction of the traditional cashier staff. This reduction in visible floor personnel created an immediate secondary crisis: an unprecedented rise in retail shrink. The lack of human surveillance on the sales floor, combined with the ease of manipulation at unsupervised self-checkout kiosks, created an environment vulnerable to both organized retail crime syndicates and opportunistic shoplifting. National Retail Federation data indicates that industry-wide retail shrink escalated into a multi-billion-dollar systemic drain during the early 2020s. Because the physical layout of the stores had already been stripped of the human staff necessary to monitor the aisles, the corporation was forced to implement defensive architecture. The locked display cases, the ceiling-mounted surveillance pods, and the algorithmic tracking systems deployed today are the direct historical consequences of that labor reduction strategy. The business reduced its workforce to protect its margins against inflation and rising wages, which directly invited higher rates of theft, which in turn forced the installation of restrictive physical barriers. Each decision was a logical, data-driven response to an immediate financial pressure, but collectively, they have locked the retailer into a structural paradox. The company cannot return to the labor-heavy, open-shelf model of the past without decimating its current operating margins, yet the automated, fortified environment it has constructed fundamentally alters the transactional dynamics that made it a dominant force in American life for over 60 years. The operational friction inside the modern retail environment has culminated in an intense, data-driven conflict over the control of shelf space, transaction processing, and automated inventory systems. At the center of this battle is a massive, opaque corporate initiative to prioritize high-margin private labels over historical national brands. Internal marketing documents and shelf allocation directives reveal that the company is systematically reducing the variety of third-party goods. When a consumer stands in front of the grocery aisles, they are witnessing a highly calculated real estate dispute. For decades, consumer packaged goods giants like Procter & Gamble, Unilever, and Kraft Heinz paid millions in slotting fees to secure eye-level placement on retail shelves. Today, those premium positions are being aggressively reclaimed by corporate house brands. The rollout of the new Better Goods brand represents the largest private label launch for the corporation in over 20 years. This product line does not target the traditional budget-conscious demographic. Instead, it features items like culinary-infused seasoning blends, oat milk plant-based frozen desserts, and double-smoked meats. Products explicitly aimed at capturing the high-spending consumer who traditionally shops at premium grocers. By manufacturing these items directly through proprietary supply chains, the retailer bypasses the standard wholesale markup. Industry financial reports show that gross margins on private label goods are typically 20 to 30% higher than those on equivalent national brands. To clear space for these high-margin items, national brands are forced into less visible locations on the lowest or highest shelves, or eliminated entirely from the inventory system. This product-level displacement is occurring simultaneously with a massive escalation in front-end surveillance and automated transaction control. The transition to self-checkout lanes has entered a high-conflict phase, manifesting as a direct clash between corporate security policies and consumer behavior. To combat the multi-billion-dollar retail shrink crisis, stores have been retrofit with computer vision AI systems developed by tech firms specializing in retail asset protection. These overhead cameras utilize artificial intelligence to monitor the exact movements of the shopper at the scanning kiosk. If the system detects a missed scan or an irregular movement, such as placing an item directly into a shopping bag without passing it across the optical scanner, the register freezes automatically. The resulting operational gridlock is documented across thousands of consumer complaints and retail employee union reports. When a machine freezes, an overhead light turns yellow, and the customer is forced to wait for an employee to manually enter an override code. Because floor staffing levels have been reduced across the board to minimize corporate payroll expenses, a single hourly associate is frequently tasked with managing up to 10 self-checkout lanes simultaneously. This structural bottleneck means that honest consumers are routinely subjected to multi-minute delays, public scrutiny, and implicit suspicion over technical glitches or misaligned barcodes, The tension has reached such a critical threshold that the corporation has begun rolling back self-checkout infrastructure in selected test markets, replacing them with traditional clerk-staffed registers or introducing strict item limits. However, in the vast majority of supercenters, the automated lanes remain the dominant transaction method, functioning as an economic compromise that prioritizes payroll reduction over customer satisfaction. Behind the scenes, the internal labor structure of the store has been thoroughly decentralized. The traditional specialized department manager, the person who used to oversee a specific area like electronics, apparel, or automotive goods, has been largely phased out under the Great Managers Corporate Reorganization Initiative. In their place, the company has deployed algorithmic labor scheduling and an all-in-one corporate digital application. Store associates now receive their daily task assignments, inventory updates, and real-time restocking directives directly from their company-issued mobile devices. The software tracks the speed at which an employee completes a task, turning physical labor into a continuous, measurable stream of data. This algorithmic management model has created a profound disconnect on the sales floor. When a customer requires human assistance to open a locked display case or locate an unindexed item, they are interacting with an employee whose schedule and performance metrics are dictated by a rigid digital queue. Stopping to assist a shopper can actively lower an associate's productivity score if it delays them from completing their algorithmically assigned restocking path. The immediate consequence is a retail floor that feels increasingly abandoned, where human employees are physically present but operationally unavailable to the public. Furthermore, the introduction of electronic shelf labels has fundamentally altered the price discovery process for the average consumer. These digital e-ink screens, which are currently being installed on over 100,000 shelves across the country, connect directly to corporate pricing databases via a centralized wireless network. While the company publicly maintains that these labels are intended to eliminate manual paper tag updates and reduce labor costs, retail analysts point out that the infrastructure provides the technical capability to implement dynamic pricing models. In traditional e-commerce, prices fluctuate continuously based on peak demand hours, current inventory deficits, and localized competitor pricing. The physical implementation of this technology introduces a profound level of price instability into the daily grocery run. For the consumer, the absolute transparency that once defined the physical price tag has been replaced by a digital display that can be modified remotely at any moment, creating a baseline layer of transaction anxiety that cannot be turned off.